Hey everybody, it's Peter, and in this video, this is going to be a good one. This is my own personal Kawasaki Z900RS SE, and if you've been following my channel in the past, you've seen me do a number of reviews on this and other vehicles and other bikes, and compare this to a number of bikes. And if you don't know who I am, part of my job, a big part of my job, is reviewing vehicles and reviewing motorcycles, but this one's gonna be different. We're gonna do a riding review of my own personal bike. So if you're interested in this bike, make sure you subscribe to my channel because there's a whole bunch of videos. I've done this bike compared to the Cafe version, I've done this bike compared to the Z650, I've done this bike compared to the Z900, and probably a bunch more. There's a bunch more on the channel, and there's a lot more to come because what I'm gonna do with this bike is follow the ownership process. If something goes wrong, you're gonna hear about it. If something goes great, you're gonna hear about it. Now, I bought this in the winter, and we film here in Canada, so that's why I've been saying Z, not Z. But I bought this in the winter and got on the road in the spring. It's been a pretty rainy summer. I've had a few things going on with my own life as well, so I haven't ridden it as much as I'd like to, but I've gotten to the point now where I'm comfortable telling you what it's all about. So again, in a couple minutes here, we're gonna go for a full riding review. We're gonna cover a whole bunch of questions that you guys wanna know about it. And if you have further questions that I don't answer in this video, make sure you let me know in the comment section because I will happily do this again and make sure you get the answers you need. First thing I wanna do is cover some of the accessories on this bike. So we're just gonna pull you in for a second so you see what we've got, and then we're gonna head out on the road. All right, the first accessory I want to show you is pretty obvious. It's just a little cover here for your radiator. You need to do this on this bike, I think. I don't think it's worth leaving it fully exposed. There's just no fairings around. It's wide open. And as many people pointed out, this fender is a little bit short and you can kind of see the dirt up here. I've left the dirt on the bike, the bugs on the bike, cleaned up, somewhat regularly. But again, I've left this on here so you can kind of see what's going on. You pretty much need this, so if you're looking at buying one, this is the Kawasaki one. There are other options that are probably a little bit less expensive, but that is an important piece to this bike. The next thing I added was the rear passenger grab rail. Now this one is less important, but it works well for me and I think it's important for me. So the first thing I like about this is if you've seen the original Z1 bike with this paint scheme, which of course that paint scheme is green where this one is black, but if you've seen that bike, they all have this rear rail. So I kind of feel like it completes the look of giving it that modern retro style where it sort of throws back to that era. What I like it for is I also put on a center stand, so I need a grab rail of some sort. You can get grab rails that just go in here. I like the look of this one that goes around, but I also have bought luggage for this bike, which will be in a future review as well. And this just gives you a few more places to strap things down. So I really like it from a practical point of view. I also kind of like the style of it. As I mentioned, I added a center stand here, so you can see that right there. This, to me, is just such an important accessory. It makes it easier for chain maintenance. And the other thing I really like is if I go park somewhere where it's, maybe gravel or softer or whatever, you have the little bit more stability with that center stand. So I like that. It is worth noting, though, that part of the center stand package from Kawasaki includes longer feelers here on your pegs. Now, for my type of riding, I was concerned that these are a little bit low. Certainly other sport bikes have them higher up, and if you're riding this like a sport bike, you're going to lean over in corners, but I lean over a long ways. Even with these slightly longer feelers, I don't have an issue rubbing anything, so unless you're taking this to the track on a regular basis, you shouldn't have any issue with the center stand there. And again, if you're taking it to the track, you probably don't have a center stand, but for street riding, no clearance issues at all, even with these longer feelers. So it's just something worth considering. It's not just a center stand. It obviously does lower your cornering clearance just a little bit, so that's why there's the longer feelers on there. The final factory accessory that I added here is heated grips. Now, I like these and I absolutely hate these. So there's a couple things to like about them. First of all, the look overall, again, this is a retro style bike. The controls here are not very retro. You can see there's all modern switchgear here, and these blend in very nicely with it. So I didn't want some big ugly thing sitting over here. I wanted it to blend in nicely, and that's why I got these ones. Now, there are cheaper options and apparently there are warmer options. I don't find these to be not warm enough for me. And again, I ride in Canada here. Of course, I do wear special gloves that are insulated on the outside in the winter and fairly thin on the inside to give you good feel. So again, it's not like it's, I still have extra protection that way. So that's something that matters. What I don't like about these is two things. First of all, the feel of all the switchgear has good clickiness to it here. The feel of this doesn't have the same clickiness to it. So that's a minor complaint, but with gloves, you can really feel these on. This one's a little bit harder to feel, not the end of the world. And it's worth noting that the style of the grip here is slightly changed over the original. So I don't know if that matters to you, but it is something worth noting. It's not identical to the original pattern there, tread pattern type thing. Now, what I don't like about this, you've heard it before, is when you tap these on, it goes So it's blinking once right now. So I had it on level 1 in the past, but it does that and then it stays on green. Tap it again and it's off. Usually what I do is I sort of cycle it down, so when I turn it on, it'll be level 3. Now the problem is, check this out. Hit this, 1, 2, 3, and then you wait, 1, 2, 3, and you wait, 1, 2, 3, and you wait, and then it eventually goes green like you'll see right now, or right about now. So there you go. The problem with this is it's just completely unsafe. You have to look down at that. You can't glance at it and tell what it's in. You can't tell if it's 1 or 3 or 2 or whatever at a glance. There's no reason, if this is a factory accessory, that they can't put some sort of indication in the dash. And even if you don't put it in the dash, why can't I just have 1, 2, and 3 lights, just like seat heaters in a car? It's just such a simpler thing. Now, they work very quickly. I can already feel these being quite warm right now. Of course, it's summertime, so that works fine. So again, you get used to it a little bit. You kind of get used to if it's in level 3 or if it's in level 2 or if it's in level 1, you know where it's at. But if you're not sure and you want to tell at a glance, you can't. So it's almost like, what's the point of the light other than just telling you it's on? It's really sort of unsafe to check that. It's one thing I don't really like. The final accessory that you'll see here is I do have a Beeline Moto GPS type system here. We'll throw it on. I'm not sure if I'll turn it on for the ride. We'll talk about that in a future review as well. But now, let's hit the road. Let's get riding. All right, here we go. So I'm off on the side of the road here. I'm just gonna pull onto the road, and I left this part in because, let's have some acceleration fun. I left this part in because of one very important reason. I had a microphone issue when I was trying to film this, so I am voiceovering this section of, actually, you know, this entire riding portion of the video, and I do apologize for that. I have to figure out a microphone issue that's gonna work better. It just wasn't up to my standards, and I don't have super high standards, but it's gotta be better. So let's talk about this bike right now. There's a number of things we're going to cover here. We're going to talk about the snatchy throttle in a second. That's a very common thing, and this bike, spoiler alert, does not have that issue. So we're going to talk about that in a second, but really let's just talk about why you buy the SE over the regular Z900RS. So that SE model, of course, adds an upgraded front suspension. And I do believe it is tweaked a little bit different. They say it's tweaked tuning. I do believe that. It adds the Öhlins rear shock, which is really something that is worth it. We're going to talk about that here. This is a very bumpy section of road that I'm driving over right now. And I did that on purpose. We'll talk about that in a second. And then the other reason to buy this bike is the Brembo brakes. And of course, the last reason to buy this bike is the color scheme. Now, if it's the color scheme that you want, if that's the reason that you absolutely love this bike, it's a bit of an expensive upgrade. Now, I'm not saying don't do it. You can just do it for that. That's totally fine. But I do think the components have some worth, and they do to me especially. And again, this road, the bumps just aren't showing on camera very well, but this is a very bumpy section of road, and there are some other sections of this road that are very windy and turny and that kind of thing. Turny, is that a word? It is now. Anyways, who cares? It's a word. But yeah, the section of this road that is, and other roads like it that are windy, it really is something that the suspension is pretty phenomenal over. So we'll talk about that, you know, I guess right now. The Öhlins suspension's job is two things. One, obviously to keep you comfortable. That's what we all think of with the suspension. But the main job of the suspension, and you can sort of see me working it right here, the main job of the suspension is to keep that tire in contact with the ground. Now, of course, when I'm upright riding like I am right now, you know, that suspension has a pretty easy job. But as the bike leans left and right, the forces of the bumps are still sort of perpendicular to the road, but your bike is leaning, so you need some precision in the suspension. And the cornering stability of this bike in bumpy corners is exceptional. That rear Öhlins shock really does keep you in contact, and it's one of those things that you don't think about too much until you move from a bike that's kind of average to a bike like this that is very, very good. So, you know, is the Öhlins suspension going to make a difference to you? Are you going to miss it if you don't have it? Probably not. I never missed it when I had bikes that didn't have it. But if you pay extra for this bike to get that paint scheme and get the Öhlins suspension and get the Brembo brakes and get the gold wheels and that kind of thing, you know, you are getting more than just a styling package. So that Öhlins suspension really impressed me. The front tuning really impressed me as well. And just general suspension overall. One of the things that I find funny about this bike is, as I said, I've done a number of reviews of this bike in the past, and I've always described it as a sport bike with an upright seating position and the retro styling. So this bike is very much that. It is a sport bike with an upright seating position and that retro styling, but as much as I told myself that, and I think as much as I tell other people that, when I first got on this bike and started really riding it, I found the suspension to be a little bit firmer than I thought. Now I want to be really clear, it's not firm uncomfortable, it's sport bike-like. And I think because in my head this looks like a retro bike, I kind of expected a softer, more mellow ride from the factory without adjusting the suspension. Now you can soften it out, but you don't have to. And I think that's one thing to remember. It's never harsh, but it is a firm sport bike-like ride. Let's have some fun and pass this guy. Gear down, I think went to 4th gear. Nope, just went to 5th gear there. 1 gear down, easily blown by, not full throttle, just unlimited power. We'll talk about the power in just a second here. But yeah, one of the things I found with the suspension is it's that firmer ride. So you do definitely feel like it is a sport bike-like ride. Again, you can soften it down, but this is not your grandfather's retro bike with that soft loping suspension. This is a performance-capable bike. All right, let's talk about the throttle, the engine, the performance, all those other things. So when I watched other reviews, read other reviews, and researched this bike, pretty much without fail, every Z900RS video talked about they love this bike, but it's got this snatchy throttle. My bike does not have a snatchy throttle. Now this is something that's kind of interesting to me because there are more and more of us who have this bike that are coming out and saying that. So the first time I heard it outside of myself was Cycle World. You can look online, YouTube's got, Cycle World has a review of this bike. Now Cycle World had, I believe it was a 2018 Z900RS in the past, and their 2018, they customized up, they put gold wheels on, they did a number of things too, and the gold wheels may have inspired this look here, but they loved everything about that bike, but they really didn't like the snatchy throttle. And then they went and tested this exact bike. So the one I'm riding is a 2022 Z900RS SE, and that's what they had, and they make mention in their video and their story that their bike didn't have that snatchy throttle, maybe a tiny bit. Well, mine doesn't have one really at all. And then most recently, Missington Flyer, who is probably one of the best bike reviewers on YouTube, absolutely love his stuff. He just bought this exact same bike. Now his might be a 2023, I'm not sure, but his bike also does not have the snatchy throttle, and he makes mention of that because other Z900s that he's ridden in the past, or Z900RSs that he had ridden in the past, do have a snatchy throttle. So it's just interesting to me because I'm not sure where the line is drawn. Do the Z900RSs not have that issue anymore? Is it just the SEs? I thought it might be a North American versus European thing, but Missington Flyer is definitely not North American. And yeah, I'm just not 100% sure, but I can tell you for sure my bike and at least 2 other Z900RS SEs, in other words, the identical bike to this, identical trim, do not have that same snatchy throttle issue. So that is something that was just interesting to me because being the big complaint that everybody else has, it just doesn't exist. That problem doesn't exist. So, I think you can get my sense. I'm super happy with this purchase. So let's talk about this engine and performance here. This guy's gonna turn left in a second here. There we go, it's signaling up, and we're gonna go by. And you'll see me sort of accelerate away here. Now, one thing to know, just engine and performance, you gotta compare it to the Z900, and here we go, let's get some acceleration in here. I was in 2nd gear to start, and again, I'm not full throttle anywhere here, just revving it up mid-rev range here, coming around the corner, just easy, awesome acceleration. But let's talk about it because when I bought this bike, before I was able to ride it, again, I'm Canadian, I bought it in the winter, it was still winter, I couldn't ride it for a while. You start doing your research and you go, man, should I've got the Z900 which has more peak power? Now that I've ridden it, absolutely I don't need more power, 100% I don't need more power, but the way this bike is tuned, I think makes a difference. And again, I'm maybe a little different than the average review. Although I'm reviewing my own bike here, I do review bikes for a living and vehicles for a living. I've been doing that for a number of years. And, when they talk about retuning an engine, you kind of blow it over and think it's just marketing hype. But this one really is tuned well. So having driven a number of performance cars, performance bikes, and that kind of thing, there's absolutely a point in my mind, and I'm going to get roasted for this in the comments, but hear me out, there's absolutely a point where you can get too much power. I drove a 700 horsepower Corvette, and I was in third gear. It was a manual transmission, heading onto the highway, and it was cooler weather, so the summer tires were probably not warmed up. But I could easily spin the tires in third gear, like 80 kilometers an hour, 50 miles an hour, heading onto the highway. And I can tell you right now, that takes the fun out of it. So as we take this corner here, again, I'm not going full throttle here, but I'm gonna give it a little bit of gas, keep it up in the revs there a little bit. And you can see, like, not full throttle, just fun, no fear. And that's the real key here. So what you have with the power on this bike, when they talk about retuning it, you lose peak horsepower compared to the Z900, which means if I'm running that 8,000 to 10,000 RPM, I have less horsepower than on the Z900. But in this range here, that 4,000 to 8,000 RPM, you have virtually the same torque in both those bikes, the Z900 and the Z900RS. And in this 4,000 to 8,000 RPM range, you have a lot of torque. Like, even below that, this bike's got a lot of torque. I'm in 6th gear, and I can do 6th gear passing all day long. You can continue to rev it out and have tons of power, but you're never, I wouldn't say you can't scare yourself, you absolutely can, but you always feel like this is just an absolute blast to drive. And then again, just some other little differences between the Z900 and Z900RS. You've got 1st gears a little lower, you've got 6th gears a little higher, so 6th gear, keeps you a little bit out of those revs, but with the 1,000 RPM, with the peak torque being 1,000 RPM lower, you still have great 6th gear passing power. There's also a flywheel. I think the flywheel is 12% different, so it'll hold revs a little bit more when you when you pull the clutch in or when you let off the throttle. But that difference there in those gearing, it doesn't matter to the average driver. If you're sitting there always on your sport bike at 8,000 to 10,000 RPM on a bike like this, like right before redline, then yeah, go for the Z900. But if you're driving, like I am, or more sporty than I am, because again, the way I drive in a video is probably a little bit more conservative than the way I would drive in, without the camera rolling. But if you're driving that range, you have instant torque everywhere, great horsepower. It really is, to me, the perfect amount of horsepower for a lot of thrills. And I say that coming from the Versys 650. So that 650 twin lineup in the Kawasaki lineup is really just a great engine. I love that engine, and it's fairly easy to drive, and that 650 twin is something I would recommend to beginners. This is not a bike I would recommend to beginners, not because it's not easy to drive, but as you rev this thing up to 5,000 RPM, you feel like you're much higher in the revs than you are, but you can continue to rev it out, and it gets a little bit addictive. It is absolutely fun, but this bike really is as easy to drive as the 650s. It feels light on its feet, but you've got so much more power, so much more torque. You've got passing power at absolutely any speed. So that is a huge thing. I am absolutely thrilled with the engine on this bike. I don't wish I had the Z900 for power. This thing is plenty powerful, and it's about fun. So we'll talk about that in a second. So we talked about the engine, we talked about comparing to the 650. The 650 I had, like I said, was the Versys 650, very comfortable upright bike. And again, what I wanted in my next bike was something that was fairly upright, just because I want some comfort. But I wanted something fun and sporty, fun to look at, fun to drive, everything. And this one really checked those boxes off. The Versys was probably a better touring bike. Cut the engine out of the bike, the Versys 650, you've got all that wind protection, all that other stuff. And, it had the luggage that could go on, and I have luggage for this bike. We're going to talk about that in a future video, what the way I solved the luggage situation on this bike. So if we talk about this as a touring bike, because my 650 Versys was a touring bike, I could tour on it. This one I can as well. Not only the engine, but the upright seating position. The other day I went out and did about a 6-hour ride. So it was about 3 hours up to see someone, and then about 3 hours back again. And it really is something that is comfortable enough to ride. One of my main concerns was, would I miss the windshield? And I would say up to about 100 kilometers an hour, 110, not a big deal. So, 60, 65, just over 65, not a big deal without the windshield. The gauges themselves are kind of like a mini screen that you don't really think about. They keep the wind up to above my stomach, sort of, my rib cage up. I do have some wind. So certainly putting a screen on here would lessen the pressure on your body, but it's not really an issue for me because I just found that, you know, probably at the end of the day I was more tired because I'm having to support my weight, but you don't need a screen to tour on this. Obviously, if you had one, you would be using some less energy, and you'd have to figure out which one to get. The design of this bike certainly leaves it open to plenty of options for a windscreen, windshield that would work for you. So there, you know, you can do a windshield if you wanted to, without any issues at all. All right. Overall, how am I happy, disappointed with this bike? I am super happy with this bike. There's no real disappointments. The only thing that is somewhat expected is a pro and a con. If you see my earlier reviews of this bike, I talked about the tires. What frustrates me is the Z900RS and you know, the Ninja 650, all these bikes that are supposedly lower, less sporty bikes, lower class bikes. In the Dunlop lineup, they had better tires. I'm dropping into fourth gear here because I was hoping to pass this guy, but there was some traffic, so you'll see me dropping in fourth gear a few times here. But anyways, the lower spec bikes had better Dunlop tires. They were a spec higher, they were Road Sport 2 tires. This one has not got the Road Sport 2. And I talked about being a little disappointed. I'm paying more for a bike, and I'm getting this SE model, which is performance version with Brembo brakes, with Olin suspension, and I didn't get the tires that you can get in a lower trim spec. Now, I will say, I'm not like Missenden Flyer, who will ride in the rain all the time. I'm a pretty fair weather rider. You know, it's who I am. Fault me if you want, but that's who I am. So I haven't ridden this too much in the rain. I got caught in a little bit of rain sometimes, and I've driven carefully, no real issues. But on dry pavement, I'm not disappointed in these tires at all. They are plenty grippy. I've driven them in cold weather. Again, not really aggressively in cold weather, but certainly aggressively in warm weather. I'm more impressed than I thought I would be with the tires. My disappointment is I got about 3,500 kilometers on this bike, and there is a little bit of flattening out on the rear tire. Part of that's me because I, you know, come out of a corner, level out, and I give it, and that's obviously putting some pressure on the tires for, you know, that could flatten it out a little bit. But there is a little bit of a flat spot developing on that tire. Not the end of the world, but you know, it's just, I'll probably upgrade to the Michelin Road 6s when I do upgrade, but it's just something to point out. Like I said, tires aren't as much of a disappointment as I thought they would be for grip, but I don't expect them to last long, and it is what it is. So there we go. There is my riding review of the Z600. Let's go back to my driveway and wrap this one up. All right, I've got a bit of a sound quality issue. I've got a happy dog to see me back home. Obviously, I'm going to get that fixed. Hi. How are you? Do you want to be on the video? Sure, you can be on video. You shouldn't bite me though. All right, come on in front of me. Anyways, I got a bit of a sound quality issue. We're gonna get that fixed for the next time. If you want to know more about this bike, let me know. I know I missed you too. I know I missed you too. Say hi to the camera. If you want to know more about the bike, make sure you let me know. I'll have lots more videos. And again, I've done a number of videos already on the bike. Can you not chew my motorcycle jacket? Speaking of the motorcycle jacket, we're going to talk about this again on a future video. It's a great jacket, so we'll talk about that. I've done a pre-review before I wore it. I know. But I haven't done a review since then. Can you get down? How about we show off a little bit? Come on in front of me over here. Come on in front of me. Come on. Okay, can you sit? Can you just sit? Can you give a high five? Oh, that's 2 high fives. Let's just do regular high fives. Can you sit? You're a silly boy. Anyways, thanks everybody for watching. Make sure you tune in to the next one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, maybe more puppy content. And do me a favor, give me a like. We'll talk to you in the next one. Okay, can you sit? Can we show off now? Can you sit? No, actually just sit. I know I missed you too. I wasn't gone for that long. I really wasn't gone that long. Hey, be nice to me.